Film history is littered with notable versus movies. Freddy versus Jason, Alien versus Predator, Captain America Civil War, Kramer versus Kramer, Sharktopus versus Whale Wolf. Yes, that is a movie. But when two J-horror giants went head-to-head in 2016, what was the outcome? And did the whole thing work as a cinema-going experience? We will discuss that today. Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that you'll find all my other Ring reviews in my Ring playlist, and I guess there will be spoilers today. Does it matter? Entirely up to you. So just to give you a bit of context coming into this review, so I made the prediction within myself that this film would be pretty bad and also quite cheesy, certainly very unnecessary, but at the same time I was kind of looking forward to it because my enthusiasm for these films has sort of hit the skids recently. I didn't fully enjoy the experience of doing Sadako 3D and Sadako 3D 2, so for this film to come along at this point, I was actually quite welcome of that, even though I wasn't expecting much. Now, in terms of my position with both of these franchises, obviously I am very well versed on everything Ring and everything Sadako. I've spent most of the last 2 or 3 months watching all of these movies. I've seen 10 of them before this. But when it comes to Ju-on, I've not had a whole lot to do with that franchise. In fact, I've only seen one of those films before. It was the original Sarah Michelle Gellar one, which wasn't the first ever Ju-on film, but it was the first American-made one. I think it came out like 2002, 2004, something like that, back when Sarah Michelle Gellar was very much a thing. I remember that film being pretty good, albeit the details are not very clear to me. I bought the DVD of it for about £1 in a second-hand shop once, watched it, and I remember liking it, actually. Obviously not enough to go and watch The Grudge 2, but I've still got that DVD on my shelf somewhere. I would absolutely watch it again. But apart from that one film, I've not seen any of the others. I think there's 10 or 11 Grudge films, maybe. Yeah, I've had very little to do with that franchise, and coming into this, I couldn't even picture in my head what the villain is. Some sort of ghost was all I could figure in my head. Beyond that, I had no other details. So that side of the coin was very much a mystery for me coming into this. So I was in a similar position to where I was going into Freddy versus Jason, because when I watched that film, I'd been a massive fan of the Friday the 13th films. I'd seen all of them, but I'd seen nothing from the Freddy side. So I was half in on the joke and half not. Now, when it comes to Alien versus Predator, I've always loved both of those franchises since I was a kid. So for that one, I was so excited. 2 of my favourite movie characters of all time on the screen together. I just couldn't wait for it to start. But certainly with Sadako versus Kayako, it was more of a Freddy versus Jason situation for me. But I'm happy to report that Sadako versus Kayako, is that how you pronounce it? Apologies if it's not. This is a much better film than Freddy versus Jason. It feels actually quite a natural versus movie. With Freddy vs. Jason, they really had to twist the logic to get some kind of story involving those two worlds, and it wasn't entirely convincing. Alien vs. Predator, I mean, they had to work really hard narratively to put those two creatures in some kind of scenario that's even remotely believable. But these two characters, Sadako and Kayako, it actually feels quite natural that they would exist in each other's worlds. I mean, they are just two curses that just happen to be in Japan, so why not have them exist in the same universe? And the story of this film is very simple and effective, actually. So Sadako is doing her thing. She's plaguing people who are watching her cursed videotape. So we're going back to a more traditional version of Sadako with this, not the more modern thing that they did with Sadako 3D and Sadako 3D 2, where they just changed it up and it didn't really feel like a Ring movie or a pair of Ring movies. But Sadako's doing her thing, and then we've got these pair of ghosts from the Ju-on world, like a crawling woman and like a small boy who makes meowing sound. Is that how it is for all Grudge films? It's like a tag team of 2 ghosts, an older female and a little boy. Well, very effective, let me tell you, because all the scenes in this film involving those two were creepy as hell. But for 2/3 of this film, it's like two separate stories running side by side, and then at some point somebody gets the bright idea of getting these two villains into the same space so that they can effectively destroy each other, and that's when you get the big sort of final battle between the two towards the end. But unlike in Freddy vs. Jason, where I feel the point where it gets to the battle is where the film just sinks without trace, that doesn't happen in this film, but it feels like a very natural thing for these two to just go at it. So, yeah, to my surprise, this was a film that I got into and I thoroughly enjoyed. There is a bit of an imbalance in terms of how much screen time the Sadako side of the movie gets and how much the Ju-on side gets. I'd say this whole movie is like 75% Sadako and 25% Ju-on, which might annoy people who are only here for Ju-on. This is especially noticeable in the first half of the movie. By the second half, things even out somewhat as we get towards the finale. But I'm glad that they've taken Sadako back to what she was originally in those earlier movies. You know, that they've clearly realised that what they were doing with the Sadako 3D films was wrong. You know, the first Sadako 3D movie, it was set up so that you'd summon the spirit and then she would come straight out of the monitor right then and there. And then by the second film, it was more like an Omen film. With this, they've gone back to having it so that when a character watches the tape, they've then got a period of time to save themselves, a few days before Sadako will turn up, albeit they obviously didn't want to take it back to being 7 days like it used to be. They've clearly decided that that's too long a time, so they've made it so that it's 2 days with this film. They could have done it that it was 7 days, though. I mean, it wouldn't have affected this movie. You just would have had bigger time jumps between the scenes, you know, but whatever, it's 2 days. The fact that it's 2 days, though, they act in this film like it's always been that way. That is the mythos of Sadako. It's a bit like in Freddy vs. Jason when they sort of claim that Jason's always been afraid of water, when clearly they just made that bullshit up just for that one movie. But this 2 day thing certainly annoyed me less than the Jason afraid of water thing. But I'm just glad that there's so many great scares in this film involving Sadako that feel fresh again. They've got the character with the long hair suddenly appearing behind people just for a moment, and we get a proper videotape angle to this film again, which we've not had for a while. A brand new style of tape as well, which I really enjoyed. It doesn't involve the well this time, but it's actually really good, albeit it's weird that we don't get to see it until the third time that someone puts it on in this movie. So the first two times someone tries to watch the tape, we just watch their expression rather than the actual tape, which did annoy me at first, but I've got to concede in hindsight that this wasn't a bad move, because it just means that when we finally do watch the tape, sort of halfway through the movie, it's just the movie's way of injecting a little bit of momentum just to keep the enjoyment going. The grudge side of the movie, or should we refer to it as Ju-on, very strong as well. Like, both sides of the movie are as strong as each other. Now, I don't have any Ju-on fatigue like I do with Sadako, so I don't know if let's say I'd watched 7 or 8 Ju-on movies coming into this one. I don't know if in that situation the scares involving the two tag team ghosts would have been less effective for me. Maybe I would have looked at all that stuff and thought, oh god, here we go again, same old stuff. I don't know. I can't say for sure how I would have felt if I'd been coming into this film having done a Ju-on review series. But watching all this stuff in the haunted house as a novice, I found it very, very chilling. Like, all the scenes of the little boy suddenly appearing just in the shot, and then the crawling female ghost comes into view a few times. So many great scenes. I just loved all that stuff. So much so that when it came to the finale and the two spirits sort of enter each other's stories, I didn't have any preference as to who won. You'd think that I would be more on the side of Sadako, but actually I was very, very chilled out about who was going to come out on top. And I think deep down I probably knew that nobody would come out on top anyway. I mean, when they make these films, they always try and make it a score draw just to please both sides of both sets of fans. But in the past, I've always kind of rooted for one or the other. You know, Freddy versus Jason, I was definitely on Jason's side. And it was a little bit underwhelming to get the end of that film that you do. Alien versus Predator, I think I was on the Predator side, though, to be honest. I didn't really think about it all that much. But certainly fans of both franchises would have been satisfied by the end of Alien versus Predator that their particular villain wasn't shown to be the weakest, I guess. And Sadako versus Kayako was always going to end on a similar kind of note. It was always going to be that both of these spirits would be vanquished, or both of them would still be alive somehow. But it was more effective for me going into the finale, being chilled out about that and not caring who won or lost, rather than definitely rooting for one or the other. But that's to the credit of the movie, that it put me in that situation with half an hour to go. The fact that I'd enjoyed both sides of the movie up to that point, that I was absolutely on everybody's side, and any outcome was fine by me. So I've got to give the film a point for that. The finale of films like this is normally where you realise that these villains were not meant to go against each other, but this film bucks the trend. By the end of this, by the time the credits were rolling, I was just kind of like, yep, brilliant, well done. But there's so many nice creative touches throughout this whole film as well, just moments of inspiration that I've not seen in for several Ring films now, like especially on the Sadako side of the equation. So some of the characters in this, towards the beginning, they realise that they need a VHS player, but instead of just happening to have one, they have to go out to a pawn shop and buy one on the cheap. I didn't expect a scene like this, because normally in films, people just happen to have a VHS player on top of their Blu-ray player. It never happens in real life. Like, nobody's got a VHS player anymore. Collectors of old movies might still have one, but it's quite a rare thing. Like, I would say like 1 in 10,000 people still have a VHS player in 2024. Most people don't even have DVD players anymore. But in movies, like, everybody still has a VHS player just in case they get involved in a horror story, you know. So it was cool to see these kids have to go to a pawn shop to get a VHS player, and it leads to some good scares and kills. And there's one cool moment where one of these girls realises that there's some of Sadako's hair still on the VHS player from an old kill a while back, which is just a really nice touch. And there's also a thing in this where one of the characters who's cursed by the tape, she tries to get a medium to do an exorcism on her, and it just left me thinking, why have they never tried this before in any of the other movies? It makes sense that if you have a world where spirits can contaminate videotapes, then why wouldn't exorcisms also be a viable thing? And it leads to an incredible scene where we get this like creepy seance where this woman's trying to call Sadako, and we get unexpected kills, and I just found it to be a very strong part of the movie. There's an interesting character in this who is a Sadako fan. Like, he's fascinated with the myth, the legend, and he really wants to meet her. He's a little bit like Golik in Alien 3, I suppose. And again, just it's something we've never seen before in this franchise that I really like. Like, he literally gets on the phone after he's been cursed and he's like, Sadako, is that you? Sadako, are you there? Brilliant. And we also get an unexpected fate for this character. So logically, this character would trundle along, and then he'd meet Sadako at the end of his 2 days, and then he'd discover that meeting is not all it's cracked up to be. But actually, no, there's a different fate in store for this character, and it's just writing, it's screenwriting that just keeps you on your toes, just keeps doing unexpected things. On the grudge Ju-on side of the movie, there's less creativity. It's mostly just great scares, but whatever, I'm fine with that. There's not much care when it comes to the well-being of kids in this movie. Like, this haunted house, there's a bunch of kids, like 11, 12 years old at most, probably younger than that. They go into this place and just get viciously wiped out by the ghosts. But Japanese, they just don't give a shit about things like this. Like this scene where 4 kids get killed, it's like when you're watching Halloween, you know the scene where Lonnie and his buddies, they roll up to the front of the Myers house and Loomis scares them away because they're not going to have kids getting killed by Myers. If the Japanese were making Halloween, they would have just had the kids go straight into the house, get stabbed by Myers, boom, 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 and then we cut to Laurie again. Yeah, in Sadako versus Kayako, that basically happens, although I didn't find that it offended my sensibilities at all, probably because most of the kills, they sort of happen and then we cut away. There's no like gratuitous, entrails of kids or anything like that, but just another interesting little facet in the movie that on the whole is just filled with cool little things. And I don't have much in the way of negatives. There's maybe a 5-minute period towards the end where things slow down a little bit when the characters are planning the big confrontation, but I mean it's scraping the barrel to call that a negative. And there's one character who's kind of like a second medium who comes into play. He seems to know things in this film that he shouldn't. There were a couple of times where I felt like I might want to pause the movie and ponder how he would have certain bits of information about this and that, but I didn't bother. I just let the film roll and I kind of forgot about it. So it's only very small complaints I could have about this movie. For the most part, it was just a total blast from beginning to end, very unexpected. And yeah, I'm just very happy about it. And this might actually be my favourite ever Versus movie, which is painful to admit, being such a massive fan of Alien vs Predator. But the score that I'm going to give this movie, I'm not sure I would give the same score to Alien vs Predator if I was going to review it tomorrow. Normally at this point in the review I would show you the version of the film that I own for this, but I don't have a copy of Sadako vs Kayako. I'm not sure it's even available outside of Japan. I'll have to check, because you know what? I wouldn't mind buying this and adding it to my shelf. It was genuinely that good. I'll definitely watch it again at some point in the future, I imagine. But it is free on YouTube. That's how I watched it. So you've got to ask yourself the question, I guess, is it worth spending money on something that you can already access for free? And given that this film has already been on YouTube for 5 years, it's probably going to stay there. So you know what? If you've not seen it, why don't you just go and check it out? Because it'll cost you no money. Even if you've not seen any of the other Ring films or Ju-on films, I don't think that would ruin this film for you. In fact, this might be a good place to start with both franchises, because it's not like you find out any of the lore from the Ring side of things or from the Ju-on side of things. So I don't think this movie would spoil the original Ring had you not already seen the original Ring. So I don't know, I'm not 100% I'm giving you great advice there, but it's just occurred to me off the top of my head this wouldn't be a bad starting point, because watching it has certainly made me enthusiastic about going back to the original Ju-on and watching that whole franchise. So I don't know. But in the meantime, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 bloody axes out of 5. I thoroughly enjoyed this film from start to finish. It's really awesome. And I just did not expect it at all. I think next after this we've got the American version of Ring 3, which is called Rings. I'm sure we will come crashing back down to earth with that one. But for now, I'm very, very happy. I had a really good experience with this movie, and I guess we will leave it at that. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.